Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we have a pair of Steyr Austrian military prototype revolvers to take a look at. These are 1893 pattern revolvers, and of course you'll remember that the Austrians adopted a Rast Gasser model of 1898 eventually for the Austrian army. So this was a revolver that they presumably tested, although I haven't actually found any trials reports from it. This is one that they tested before eventually adopting the Rast Gasser. Manufactured by Steyr, and it is basically a, well, technically speaking, it is a Pieper or Pieper mechanism revolver. More commonly today we will call it a Nagant type revolver. It does actually have a cylinder that moves forward. It is a gas seal revolver, double action, 7-shot, 8mm caliber, which was typical for the Austrians at the time. The Rast Gasser they adopted in '98 was also an 8mm gun. Different cartridge though, because this has a Nagant style of cartridge. We'll take a closer look at that in just a moment. Now, in total they made less than 100. I don't know exactly. The highest serial number I'm aware of is in like the 60s, maybe the 70s of these. And there were 3 different patterns of them. So the very first guns, well, the first and second patterns are both tilt-out cylinder designs. So nice and fast to extract. You can knock all the cases out at once. This is obviously the style of revolver unloading that is predominant still to this day. However, the third pattern, after they experimented with these, they did have a third pattern of gun where they actually got rid of that, and instead they fixed the cylinder in the frame and added an Abadie style of loading gate to it, which is, interestingly, what the Rast Gasser 1898 would use. The idea of an Abadie loading gate is, well, it's a loading gate on the side, and when you open the loading gate, it disconnects the trigger from the hammer. So you can pull the trigger and it will index the cylinder 1 cartridge at a time. That makes for, well, faster unloading and reloading than a gun like a Colt Single Action Army, but not as fast as something like one of these earlier pattern guns that had a swing out cylinder. Anyway, let's take a closer look at exactly how that works. So really a very gorgeous finish on there, obviously. And both of these two are in fantastic condition. We have one marking, which is Waffenfabrik Steyr, the manufacturer here. There are no model designations. On this particular gun, there aren't any other markings at all except for the serial number. This is number 20. A few of these, the ones that were actually tested by the Austrian military, do have Austrian military acceptance marks on them, which makes sense. But these were never sold commercially, so they don't have standard proof marks. Now, there is an exception to that, which is this other gun. It's really hard to see, but right there we actually have an Eagle N German proof mark from, well, basically from the Nazi period. What this indicates is that someone had actually imported this gun into Germany at that point and sold it, and it had to be proofed. So those proof marks, it was proof tested and the proof mark added in the 40s. Cylinder removal on these is done with this lever on the side. It doesn't move very far. You just pull it down a bit and then you can pull the cylinder out. It is a 7-shot revolver like the 1895 Nagant, and has a center extractor. So extract everything at once, reload, close the cylinder, and you're back to shooting. You can see the action operating here with the cylinder out. We have the hand to rotate. We have the lock that's going to drop down when you're actually pulling the trigger. This lug right here acts to push the cylinder forward. And then we have a lock that comes up in the back right there to hold the cylinder in position while it's actually firing. When you fire, the firing pin protrudes through. And this has a Warnant style of springing back system. So as soon as you release pressure on the hammer, or as soon as you release pressure on the trigger, the hammer pops back so that you don't have any chance of accidental discharge. It can go forward to here, but it can't protrude through and hit a primer unless you're actually pulling the trigger. Now, when I cycle this, you can see that the cylinder is going to move forward. Not much. I mean, it's not even 2 millimeters. It's just a tiny, tiny fraction. Just far enough for the front of the cylinder to nest over the forcing cone at the back of the barrel. Then the cartridge extends all the way flush to the end of the cylinder, just like on the Nagant revolver. So the brass case of the cartridge overlaps the gap between the cylinder and the barrel, which makes it a gas-tight system. In theory, this was done to get a little bit more ballistic power out of the cartridge, so you don't lose anything to the cylinder gap. The sights are pretty typical for revolver sight of the time, just a rear channel and a front blade. I've already pulled this one apart, but the way this goes together is with a removable side plate. We have a screw holding it in place. This is pretty typical for revolvers of this period. So we can pull the side plate off, all sorts of fine machining under there. We can then pull the right-hand grip panel off. The left-hand grip panel off. Interestingly, there are a lot of strawed components in this gun. The whole swing-out mechanism, the cylinder, trigger, hammer, all of the internal parts here, all of the screws, these are all strawed, and that is it's a heat treat or a heat temper solution. It's not actually a finish like bluing, and it really doesn't do anything to protect the surface. This surface will weather and wear just like one that's in the white, but it sure does give it a really nice look. The one other thing to point out in here, we have this sliding thing. This is there to allow you to easily remove the mainspring. So if you cock the hammer, you've now compressed the mainspring. Note that this spring does all of the work in the gun. It's putting tension on the hammer up here and the trigger down here. Once it's cocked, you can then slide this spring up to there, and you can then drop the hammer, and this ring holds the spring in the compressed state so that you can pull it out and then easily reinstall it. I'm not going to do that this time, but that's the idea. Looking at this gun overall, I can definitely see why the Austrian army decided that they weren't interested in it, although honestly the Rast Gasser is only a little bit better. These guns really have all of the downsides of the Russian model of Nagant that we're familiar with today. They have very heavy triggers, especially in double action. It really is like an 1895 Nagant double action trigger. Super long and super heavy because of that cylinder camming system. They're also rather large revolvers, certainly for the caliber. They're rather tall revolvers as well. That's something you can just see by looking at them. What they do have going for them, though, is they are gorgeous guns. The straw bluing on the cylinder and the hammer and the other parts looks really fantastic. Unfortunately, looking fantastic doesn't really equate very well to field success. So probably a good thing that they ended up going with the Rast Gasser. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and if you really enjoy this, check out my Patreon page if you want to help be part of what makes it possible for me to bring guns like this to you on the net. Thanks for watching.